They called it Eternal Rome, the Caput Mundi, the navel of the world, and yet, on a warm September day in the year 476, the last Roman emperor, a boy barely 16, was told to step down, not by a senator or rival general, but by a foreign warlord. The once mighty empire that had ruled the known world bowed not with a climactic final battle, but with a whimper, a whisper, and a signature. How did it come to this? How did the greatest empire the ancient world had ever seen, with legions that marched from Britannia to Babylon, with aqueducts, laws, languages, and gods, collapse into fragments ruled by warlords, rebels, and ex-Roman soldiers who no longer called themselves Roman? More than 1,000 years after its mythical founding by Romulus, the Roman Empire ceased to exist in the West, not by fire from heaven or invasion alone, but by internal decay so deep it had eroded the very pillars of civilization. This is the story of how Rome not burned in a day, but corroded over centuries fell, and of the forgotten names, chaotic wars, and desperate decisions that led to one of the most consequential collapses in human history. The decline did not begin with a sword, but with a knock on the door. In 376, a large group of Gothic tribes appeared at the borders of the Roman Empire. They were not invaders. They were refugees, driven from their ancestral homelands by the terrifying expansion of the Huns in the east. The Goths came to Rome's Danube frontier, seeking shelter. Rome had seen migrations before, and in centuries past, it had known how to absorb them. But this time was different. The Goths were not given land or protection. Instead, they were exploited. As famine spread in the Gothic refugee camps, Roman officials sold them dog meat at exorbitant prices. Families sold their children in exchange for food. There was no mercy. There was only profit. This brutality ignited the spark of rebellion. The Gothic War that followed would prove catastrophic. In 378, near the city of Adrianople in modern-day Turkey, the Eastern Roman Emperor Valens led an army to suppress the uprising. He underestimated the enemy. The Gothic cavalry shattered the Roman lines in a crushing ambush. Valens was killed. 2/3 of his army died alongside him. The shock of Adrianople echoed across the empire. It was not just a defeat, it was a revelation. Rome could lose. When Emperor Theodosius I came to power, he chose diplomacy over annihilation. The Goths were allowed to settle within the empire. Their soldiers were recruited into Roman legions. For the first time, entire foreign tribes were permitted to live together within imperial borders. It was a dangerous precedent. Among these new allies was a man who had once served under Theodosius, Alaric, a Gothic warrior, a general, a future king. When Theodosius died in 395, he split the empire between his two sons, Honorius in the west and Arcadius in the east. This division, though intended to preserve unity, would hasten the unraveling. In the shadows of this dynastic split, Alaric rose. Elected king of the Visigoths, the Western Goths, he turned against the empire he had once served. Betrayed and bitter, he began a campaign of vengeance. His first target, Rome itself. In 401, Alaric marched into Italy. He was met by one of the last great Roman generals, Stilicho, a Vandal by blood, Roman by rank. Stilicho repelled Alaric in brutal battles. But Rome's triumph was short-lived. In 408, Emperor Honorius, increasingly paranoid and isolated in the city of Ravenna, ordered Stilicho's execution. With the only capable general dead, Alaric returned. He besieged the city of Rome itself. Establishment seat in Rome. Once the unassailable center of the world paid a humiliating ransom, but it was not enough. Negotiations broke down. Alaric returned in 410. This time, there was no resistance. For 3 days, the Visigoths sacked the Eternal City. It was the first time in 800 years that Rome had fallen to a foreign enemy. The psychological blow was immense. When Honorius heard the news, he reportedly mistook the city of Rome for a prize chicken he kept named Roma. Upon clarification, he was relieved. The chicken was safe. But the world was not. The sack of Rome was a breaking point. From this moment forward, the Western Roman Empire was no longer seen as invincible. It was prey. In the years that followed, cows spread like wildfire. In the province of Britannia, legions declared a rival Emperor Constantine III. He marched into Gaul, taking his legions with him. The local Britons, abandoned and enraged, revolted. They pleaded with Honorius for aid. He refused, and so Rome lost Britannia, not with a battle, but with silence. Constantine was eventually captured and executed, but the doors had already opened. From across the Rhine, Germanic tribes poured into Gaul, seizing land and destroying what little order remained. In Hispania, the Suebi established a kingdom in the west. The Vandals, along with the Alans, moved south through the Strait of Gibraltar, capturing the wealthy Roman province of North Africa. Carthage, jewel of the Western Mediterranean, fell to them. Soon, they would control Sicily, Corsica, and Sardinia, establishing the Vandal kingdom. From pirates, they became kings, and the Visigoths, they marched again. After briefly allying with Rome to drive out rival invaders, they betrayed the empire and seized control of southern Gaul and most of Hispania. Every alliance was temporary. Every victory, borrowed time. Rome, once the master of diplomacy, had become its victim. By the mid-5th century, the Western Roman Empire was an empire in name only. Its borders were broken, its economy hollowed, and its armies a shadow of their former might. The legions that had once inspired terror in every corner of the known world were now filled with men who spoke no Latin, had never seen Rome, and owed their loyalty to gold, not glory. The most terrifying of these mercenary legions were not under Roman command at all. In 451, the Huns, led by the infamous Attila, stormed into Gaul. Antiracitis fell. The Roman general Flavius Aetius, a rare surviving genius of military leadership, managed to unite Roman troops with Visigothic allies to halt Attila at the Battle of the Catalonian Plains. It was one of the last great victories of the Western Empire, but victory came at a cost. The Gothic king Theodoric died in battle, and Aetius, the savior of Rome, would not live much longer. He was murdered in 454 by Emperor Valentinian III, who feared his rising power. A year later, Valentinian was himself assassinated. The imperial throne, already brittle, now stood empty in authority. If not in body, a string of weak, forgettable emperors followed, each more beholden to the whims of generals, aristocrats, or foreign kings than the will of the Roman people. One of these was Julius Nepos, an emperor entitled, exiled, and ineffective. In 475, his own general, a man named Orestes, betrayed him. Orestes installed his own son as emperor. The boy's name was Romulus. It was a name heavy with symbolism, the founder of Rome, reborn in a child emperor. But history would play a cruel trick. Romulus, who would later be mocked as Romulus Augustulus. Little Augustus would also be the last. He was barely 16. The year was 476. Rome, or what was left of it, was under the control of barbarian federates, foederati tribes, who had once served as allies and auxiliaries. They demanded something simple: land in Italy, payment for their loyalty. Orestes refused. The federates turned to one of their own, Odoacer, a man of uncertain origin, possibly of Syrian descent. Odoacer had risen through the Roman army and knew its weaknesses. He gathered the federate troops and marched against Orestes. The final confrontation came swiftly. Orestes was captured and executed. Odoacer then entered Ravenna, the imperial capital. Before him stood the teenage emperor, Romulus. What happened next did not involve fire or conquest. Odoacer deposed the boy, but spared his life. Romulus was sent into comfortable exile, a child caught in the ties of history. Odoacer then sent the imperial regalia, the crown and robes of the Western Roman emperor, to the Eastern emperor in Constantinople. He made a simple statement: there was no longer need for two emperors. One was enough. The Western Roman Empire was over. Odoacer did not claim the title of emperor. He became Rex Italiae, king of Italy, and ruled in the name of the Eastern emperor. But everyone knew the truth. The Roman Empire in the West had died not in blood, but in bureaucracy. It is tempting to say that barbarians brought down Rome, and it is true, in part, but it is a comfortable lie. Rome fell because it could no longer sustain itself. Its greatness, its roads, legions, its baths, its bureaucracy demanded an immense and continuous flow of resources. For centuries, this was fueled by expansion. New provinces meant new taxes, new slaves, and new frontiers. But after Emperor Trajan's conquest in the early 2nd century, the borders of the empire froze. No new land, no new slaves, no new revenue. What remained was stretched thin. The empire's geography, vast and beautiful, became its enemy. Communication from Syria to Gaul could take weeks. When crises erupted on multiple frontiers, emperors were forced to choose where to act and where to abandon. To solve this, Emperor Diocletian, in 285, divided the empire into east and west, each with its own emperor. It was a logical decision. In the short term, it worked, but in the long term, it doomed the West. The East, with its wealthy cities, its trade-rich coastlines, and its Greek-speaking culture flourished. Constantinople became the jewel of the empire. The West, with its poor agrarian provinces, its endless military needs, and its collapsing cities, struggled to survive. War after war with Huns, with Goths, with their own generals drained the treasury, and without conquest, Rome's slave-driven economy began to falter. With fewer slaves, productivity collapsed. The military, once Rome's pride, became a patchwork of mercenaries and conscripts. The best soldiers were not Romans. Many had never even set foot in Italy. There was also a change of soul. In 313, Christianity was legalized. By 380, it became the state religion. The gods of old Jupiter, Mars, Minerva were cast aside. Gone was the Roman genius for absorbing the gods of conquered peoples. Instead, the empire had a single god, a god who did not permit emperors to be worshipped, a god who challenged the very idea of divine monarchy. Where once emperors gained legitimacy by divine status as sons of gods, or gods themselves, now they stood as mortals, bound by the church. Rome's old religion had been a political tool, malleable. inclusive, unifying. Christianity was spiritual, rigid, and unyielding. It saved souls, but it could not save the empire. And yet, did Rome ever truly fall? Its empire collapsed. Yes, but its memory endured. In the East, the Byzantine Empire lived on for another 1,000 years, until the fall of Constantinople in 1453. In the West, the Roman name rose again in Charlemagne's Holy Roman Empire. In the laws of Europe, in the Latin language that gave birth to French, Spanish, Italian, and others, Roman roads became medieval highways. Roman towns became modern cities. Roman law shaped civil codes. Roman religion, Christianity, became the spiritual compass of Europe. Even the title Caesar survived. Kaiser in Germany, Tsar in Russia, echoes of power long vanished. Rome, like its legions, did not easily. The fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 was not the end of Rome, it was the beginning of a myth. The city of Rome itself would endure. Pilgrims still came to walk the ancient stones. The church anchored in the Vatican would rise as the new guardian of Roman continuity, not through legions, but through liturgy. The Bishop of Rome, known to history as the Pope, gradually inherited the mantle of leadership, not as emperor, but as shepherd. In the vacuum of imperial rule, a spiritual empire began to form, one that transcended borders and endured for centuries. In the East, the Byzantines called themselves Romans until their last breath. For them, the fall of the western half was not a death, but a shedding of dead weight. Constantinople flourished while Ravenna and Rome decayed. To Greek-speaking emperors, Rome's fall was a Western tragedy, but not their own. And in the north, among the Germanic tribes who had once been enemies of the empire, a strange reverence for Roman civilization took hold. These were not mere conquerors, they became imitators. Odoacer, the so-called destroyer of the West, ruled in the name of the Eastern Emperor. His successor, Theodoric the Great, leader of the Ostrogoths, would declare himself the protector of Roman customs. Gothic kings wore Roman togas. Barbarian rulers adopted Latin titles. Roman senators, reduced in power but not in pride, still advised courts that bore only the shadow of imperial majesty. There was no clean break. Rome did not vanish like Atlantis. It faded. It morphed. It was mourned and mimicked a fallen star that continued to light the sky long after its fire had gone out. For centuries, historians, theologians, generals, and philosophers have debated the reasons for Rome's fall. Was it decadence, weak leadership, economic collapse, a loss of civic virtue, or was it something subtler, a failure to adapt? Rome thrived when it evolved. When it absorbed the beliefs, languages, and strategies of its conquered peoples, it grew stronger. But when it closed its borders, froze its identity, and declared itself complete, it began to rot from within. Empires, like organisms, need renewal. Rome's borders had grown too vast, its leadership too incompetent, and its economy too dependent on systems that could no longer support it. As the aristocracy hoarded wealth and influence, the central government became paralyzed. Taxes fell, roads crumbled, and the citizens of the empire slowly stopped believing in its future. And yet, even in death, Rome taught the world something timeless, that power is not only measured in armies, but in ideas. The concept of Rome of law, order, and civilization outlasted the very institutions that claimed to embody it. In that sense, Rome did not fall, it was transformed. And perhaps this is the true paradox at the heart of the story. The empire that fell never truly died, and the empire that survived never truly lived. Picture the moment: a dusty road outside Ravenna. A column of soldiers marches quietly toward the city gates. At their center rides a man in battered armor, Odoacer. Before him stands the last Roman emperor, a teenager who grips the arms of his wooden throne with trembling hands. No war horn sounds. No banner falls. There is no fire, no siege, no grand proclamation, just silence. And a name, Romulus, echoing faintly through marble halls once walked by Caesar. The boy is told to stand down. He obeys. The world does not end, but something ancient, something imperial, something eternal is gone. History is often imagined in sound and fury, but sometimes it ends with a whisper. Was Rome's fall inevitable? Could a stronger emperor, a better general, a smarter reform have saved it? Or did Rome's very success contain the seeds of its destruction? It built roads no one could defend. It conquered lands it could not govern. It promised civilization to peoples who would one day demand it for themselves, not as subjects, but as sovereigns. And what of us? What happens when empires today stretch their influence too far, ignore their internal fractures, and rest on glories long past? What happens when the citizens of a great power begin to lose faith in the very idea of that power? Rome offers no answers, only a mirror. And in that mirror, if we dare to look long enough, we may see not only the ruins of the past, but the outlines of our future. If you found this journey through the twilight of Rome compelling, consider subscribing to Legacy Files. Here, history isn't just retold, it's relived. And every empire, no matter how mighty, leaves a legacy that demands to be understood